I walked into the Thanksgiving dinner hoping for a truce, but my husband had brought his mistress along as if I were the intruder. Then the host read my name from the guest list and froze. The entire room went deadly silent. Right then, I realized the wealthy man they were toasting had forgotten who actually owned the stage. He thought he could replace me, but he was about to learn the price of admission. My name is Claire Hartley, and at 34 years old, I had learned that the hardest battles were often fought in total silence. I pulled my coat tighter against the biting November wind as I stood before the towering iron gates of the estate just outside Philadelphia. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and whispered a command to myself. Just keep it together for tonight. Just survive Thanksgiving. My phone buzzed in my pocket, vibrating against my hip like a warning. I pulled it out and saw the name on the screen. Grant. You can come a bit late if you want. I have handled everything. I stared at the text. There was no warmth in those words, no affection. It was the tone of a CEO dismissing a subordinate he planned to fire on Monday morning. Grant Whitmore was 39 years old, and lately he sounded less like my husband of 10 years and more like a man managing a liability. I walked up the long, gravel driveway. The villa loomed ahead, glowing with golden light, promising warmth and family. But as I neared the entrance, my eyes were drawn to Grant's sleek black sedan parked aggressively close to the front steps. I glanced inside as I passed. Illuminated by the soft porch light, a pair of red-soled stilettos sat casually in the passenger footwell. They were not mine. It was a small detail, a careless leftover, but it made my stomach turn to absolute ice. He did not even care enough to hide them. I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The foyer was alive with the sound of clinking crystal and the murmur of polite conversation. The rich, savory scent of roasted turkey and sage filled the air, contrasting sharply with the cold void opening up in my chest. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, watching the scenes of a happy marriage that no longer included me. Then I saw him. Grant stood near the grand fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in one hand. His other hand rested firmly, possessively, on the lower back of a young woman in a shimmering silver dress. He leaned in close to her, whispering something that made her laugh. I stepped into the light. Grant turned. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed that I had arrived on time. He cleared his throat and addressed the small circle of investors standing around him. Everyone, I want you to meet someone special, Grant said, his voice smooth. This is Whitney. The woman who has helped me so much with the transition. Whitney Cole. She turned to me, her smile sharp and practiced. She did not look like an interloper. She looked like she belonged there. Before I could speak, a hand clamped around my upper arm. My mother-in-law, Dolores Whitmore, was suddenly at my side, her grip surprisingly strong. She leaned in, her perfume overpowering. Do not make a big deal out of this, she hissed, her voice low and threatening. We have major sponsors here tonight. We have partners. Do not ruin the mood. I pulled my arm free and walked toward the dining room. The long mahogany table was set for 20 people, gleaming with silver and fine china. I scanned the place cards. Grant sat at the head of the table. Whitney was seated to his immediate right. I looked for my name. I finally found it at the very far end of the table, next to the swinging door of the kitchen. It was a seat usually reserved for the overflow guests, or the help. Miles Redding, our host and a prominent billionaire philanthropist, stood up at the front of the room. He tapped a spoon against his wine glass, and the room fell into a hush. Welcome, everyone. Miles boomed, adjusting his glasses. Before we begin this feast, I want to acknowledge our guests of honor and the generous donors who made this fundraising gala possible. He lifted a heavy sheet of cream-colored paper. He began reading names, his voice steady and rhythmic. Grant Whitmore. Whitney Cole. He continued down the list, then he paused. He squinted at the paper, as if the ink had suddenly changed color. Claire Hartley, He read aloud. He stopped. He did not continue to the next name. Instead, he looked up, scanning the length of the table until his eyes locked onto mine. His hand tightened around the paper, crushing the expensive cardstock as if he had just seen a ghost. The silence in the room stretched thin and tight, and in that moment, I knew the game had changed. For the last 2 years, the division of labor in our marriage had been absolute, though entirely hidden from the public eye. I was the engine, the sleepless force behind North Pine Ventures, a real estate development and high-end event firm that I had built from the ground up. Grant, on the other hand, was the face. He played the role of the charming, successful husband perfectly, shaking hands at galas and smiling for magazine covers while I reviewed contracts until 3 o'clock in the morning. He often looked at me with a weary, practiced disappointment across the breakfast table and said the same thing. "I just want you to be softer. Claire, you are always so hard, so jagged." It was rich coming from him. He wanted me soft, but he spent hard. The platinum membership at the country club, the bespoke suits from Savile Row that cost $6,000 a pop, and the vintage watches he collected like baseball cards, all of it was funded by the jagged edges of my ambition. He wanted a traditional wife with a modern bank account. I had walked into this house tonight believing his lie. He had called me 2 days ago, his voice lower, seemingly vulnerable. "Please, Claire, just come to Thanksgiving. But come as my wife, not the CEO. Let's just be us." I had actually let myself hope. I had left my work phone in the car. I had worn a dress he liked. But as I sat in that exile seat at the end of the table, I realized how stupid I had been. I looked up the table at Whitney. She did not look like a nervous mistress facing the wife. She stood by Grant's chair, smoothing the lapel of his jacket with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. She looked at me, but there was no jealousy in her eyes. There was only calculation. She was looking at me the way a person looks at an ATM that is about to dispense cash. She was not here to steal my husband. She was here to help him liquidate me. Dolores was holding court near the center of the table, her voice carrying over the din of silverware. "My Grant is on the verge of something truly magnificent," she boasted, waving a fork for emphasis. "A deal that will finally make him truly independent." I took a sip of water to hide the bitter smile threatening to break onto my face. Independent. In the Whitmore dictionary, independence apparently meant leveraging your wife's assets to fund your own ego trip. I stopped looking at my husband and started looking at the room, really looking. That was when the cold reality settled in. This was not a family gathering. To my left was a man wearing a pinstripe suit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. I recognized him as a corporate liability attorney from the city. Across from him sat a woman who kept checking the Nikkei index on her watch. There were bankers, private equity liaisons, and a notary public pretending to enjoy his cranberry sauce. This was not a dinner, it was a closing ceremony. Grant suddenly leaned over. He had moved from the head of the table to crouch beside my chair, his breath hot against my ear. "You sit still," he whispered, his voice devoid of the charm he used for the crowd. "Do not embarrass me. I have people here. After dessert, I need you to sign one thing, just one. Tiny thing." He pulled back, patting my shoulder with a heavy, patronizing rhythm. As he walked away, I looked down at the place setting next to my plate. There, resting on a crisp linen napkin, was a fountain pen. It was heavy, black lacquer with gold trim. I squinted at the cap. The initials G.W. were engraved into the metal. It was a prop. He had placed it there before I even arrived. I stared at the pen, my pulse slowing down into a cold, rhythmic thud. The hurt evaporated, replaced by a crystalline clarity. They had staged this entire evening, brought in witnesses, and prepared the documentation. They thought they were trapping a heartbroken wife who would sign anything to save her marriage. I picked up the pen and turned it over in my fingers. If this is the night they try to push me out of my own life, I thought, then I am going to see exactly how much they think I am worth. Miles Redding did not shout. He simply gestured for me to rise, his movement sharp and commanding. He led me away from the dining table toward the high-backed leather chairs arranged near the roaring fireplace, separating us from the rest of the guests. The heat from the fire flushed my cheeks, but the look in his eyes made my blood run cold. He held a leather folder in his hands, tapping it rhythmically against his palm. "Ms. Claire Hartley," Miles said, his voice low but cutting through the ambient noise like a knife. "Do you know that your name is currently sitting at the top of my primary sponsorship file?" I froze. My mind raced backward through the last month of chaotic schedules and endless meetings. I had not opened a single email from the Redding Foundation. I had certainly not authorized any funds for this specific gala. I do not understand," I stammered, genuinely confused. "I never spoke to your team." Miles flipped the folder open. He pulled out a heavy sheet of bond paper titled Pledge Commitment. My eyes scanned the numbers, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a commitment for $2.5 million, but the number was not the terrifying part. At the bottom of the page, in blue ink, was my signature. It was not just a close approximation, it was a masterpiece of mimicry. It had the slight loop on the C and the sharp, aggressive strike through the T that I had developed over a decade of signing contracts. Before I could deny it, a hand landed on my shoulder, heavy, sweaty. Grant squeezed between us, a tight, artificial smile plastered on his face. "Oh, Miles, it is just a misunderstanding," Grant laughed, though the sound was brittle and dry. "Claire agreed weeks ago. She just forgets things lately. Stress." You know Whitney appeared at his other elbow, nodding vigorously. She looked at Miles with wide, innocent eyes that hid a viper's intent. "Claire is so busy with her little projects," Whitney said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. So Grant signed on her behalf to make sure the deadline was met. Just being a good husband. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Signed on her behalf. That was the narrative. They had not just forged my name, they had practiced it. Someone had sat at a desk for hours, perfecting the curve of my letters. And they had brought me here, to this room full of witnesses, to nod and smile so that the forgery would become truth. If I accepted it now, I would be legally binding myself to their theft. They were using the social pressure of the party to validate a crime. Miles looked from Grant to Whitney, and then back to the paper. His expression hardened. He was a businessman, not a fool, and he recognized the scent of desperation. "I do not do business with paperwork that smells like fraud," Miles said, snapping the folder shut. "I am pausing everything, the transfer, the announcement, all of it. Until Claire herself confirms this validity." Dolores lunged forward. She grabbed Miles's arm, her fingernails digging into his expensive suit jacket. Her face was a mask of panic and fury. "You are embarrassing my son in front of the whole room," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. Do not you dare ruin this for him." I watched them panic. I saw the sweat beading on Grant's forehead. I saw the desperation in Whitney's eyes. They needed my validation to unlock the money. I decided to give them a rope to hang themselves with. I stepped forward, smoothing my dress, and looked Grant dead in the eye. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. Grant's shoulders sagged in relief. Color returned to his face. He thought he had won, but I was not finished. "I confirm it. Right here." I continued, my voice dropping an octave. "But first, I want to see exactly who used my name to open this door." I turned to Miles, keeping my voice just loud enough for him to hear, but soft enough to keep the vultures at bay. "Mr. Redding, I need to verify some banking details regarding this generous donation. May I use your study? I need to make a private call. Miles looked relieved. He saw an opportunity to move a potential scandal behind closed doors. He nodded quickly. Of course. Claire, use the library. It is soundproof. I walked into the library and closed the heavy oak door. The silence was immediate and heavy. I did not waste a second. I pulled out my phone, my fingers moving with the muscle memory of a woman who had managed crises for a living. I was not crying. I was not trembling. I was executing. First, I opened the administration portal for North Pine Ventures. I found Grant's profile. He had director privileges, a title I had given him out of kindness. I revoked his access to the company email server. I deactivated his building security badge. I cut his access to the corporate credit card portal. In 10 seconds, I turned him from an executive into a trespasser. Next, I opened our personal banking app. The joint account held a significant sum, the liquid cash we used for daily expenses and his lavish lifestyle. I initiated a transfer of the entire balance to my personal pre-marital savings account. I paused, my thumb hovering over the screen, and decided to leave exactly $200. It was enough for a taxi ride to a motel, but not enough to hire a crisis PR firm. I dialed Naomi Keller, my personal attorney. She answered on the second ring. Naomi, it is starting, I said, my voice flat. What is he doing? She asked. Forged signature plus attempted embezzlement, I replied. He is trying to move assets through a donation scheme. I need a restraining order. Within 24 hours. I am on it, Naomi said. The click of a keyboard already audible in the background. Do not sign anything. Get copies of what they have. I hung up and switched to my messaging app. I text Ethan Brooks, my CFO, code red, audit every expense Grant has approved in the last 12 months. Prioritize unknown vendors, round number invoices, and transfers made outside of business hours. Ethan's reply came instantly. On it. There was a knock at the door. Miles entered, looking anxious. He held a tablet in his hand. Claire, he said, his voice tight. I checked the source of the pledge document. I thought you should see this. I need a copy of everything. Miles, I said, walking over to him, and the list of who sent it to you. He handed me the tablet. I scrolled through the email chain. The sender was not a law firm or a bank. The address was Whitmore Consulting Liaison, a generic Gmail account that sounded professional but had no corporate domain. It was amateur hour. Then I saw the attachment at the bottom of the email chain. The file name made my heart skip a beat, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it. Hartley Jart signature samples. Zip. I stared at the screen. They had actually sent a file of my practice signatures to the printer. It was not just fraud. It was documented, premeditated identity theft. Miles, I said, looking up at him. Forward this to me. Now. Claire. What is going on? Miles asked, his face pale. Just send it, I said. He tapped the screen. The evidence landed in my inbox a second later. I took a deep breath. I smoothed my hair. I unlocked the door. I walked back toward the dining room. I could hear Grant's laugh booming from the table, a sound of premature victory. He thought he had cornered me. He thought I was in that room crying or calling a therapist. I checked my watch. The systems were locking down. The money was moving. The lawyers were drafting. They thought they were forcing me out. In reality, they had just handed me the weapon I needed to bury them. I walked back to the table and took my seat. The air in the dining room had shifted. The guests were eating their pumpkin bisque, but their eyes kept darting toward me, sensing the invisible electricity arcing between my husband and me. Grant, oblivious to the storm gathering above his head, stood up. He tapped his crystal flute with a silver fork, the sharp chime cutting through the murmur of conversation. To family, Grant announced, raising his glass high. His face was flushed with wine and triumph. and to gratitude. I am so thankful for the support system that allows a man to dream big. To my mother, for her wisdom. To Whitney, for her tireless assistance. And to my wife, Claire. He looked down at me, his smile tight and challenging. He was daring me to make a scene. He wanted to prove to the room that I was submissive, that my earlier hesitation was just a woman's nerves. Claire, he said, his voice dripping with faux sweetness. Do you want to say a few words? Maybe express your excitement for the future? It was a trap. If I stayed silent, I looked weak. If I argued, I looked unstable. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I did not smile. I did not raise my glass. I looked directly at Miles Redding. I just want to thank our host, I said, my voice clear and steady. Thank you, Miles, for being so careful with my name. The room went dead silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. It was not a thank you, it was an accusation wrapped in silk. Miles gave me a curt nod, his face grave. He understood the subtext perfectly. Whitney let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Oh, Claire is always so strong, she chirped, though her eyes were not on me. They were darting frantically toward the leather briefcase sitting by Miles's feet. She is truly inspiring. I sat down. Immediately. I felt a hand clamp onto my wrist beneath the tablecloth. It was Dolores. Her grip was painful, her fingernails digging into my skin like talons. She leaned in close, pretending to admire my necklace. Girl, do not ruin the meal, she whispered, her voice a low growl that only I could hear. We are at the finish line. Do not you dare tip the boat now. I turned to her. I did not pull my hand away. Instead, I stared at her until she flinched. I am not tipping the boat, Dolores, I whispered back. I am just checking to see who is eating out of my bowl. She released me as if I had burned her. Across the table, a man in a gray suit, one of the investment bankers, cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. Well, Grant, you are a lucky man, the banker said jovially. Running a business like North Pine Ventures is no small feat. You have a very talented wife. Grant swirled the wine in his glass, his expression turning patronizing. She is talented, absolutely, Grant said, chuckling. But the stress is a lot for her. That is why I manage the heavy lifting for her. I handle the finances so she can focus on the creative side. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. He had just walked right into it. You manage it for me? I asked, my voice loud enough to carry. That is interesting. Grant. By what paperwork do you manage my company? The table went quiet again. Grant's smile faltered. He looked at the banker, then at Miles, and realized he needed to reassert dominance. He straightened his tie and delivered the blow he had been saving. Well, darling, you know I have always had your best interests at heart, he said, his voice dropping to a serious, somber tone. Ever since your surgery last year. When you signed that power of attorney, you entrusted me to make decisions when you were not capable. And frankly, with how confused you seem tonight, I am just doing my job. The room exhaled. He had played the sick wife card. He was painting me as mentally fragile and himself as the burdened caretaker. I did not argue. I did not scream that the power of attorney was for a simple appendectomy and was supposed to be temporary. I just stared at him. Information clicked into place in my mind like the tumblers of a safe. They had a power of attorney. They had the forged signature. And they had a notary at the table. They were not just here to announce a sponsorship. They were planning to use that document to transfer something massive immediately after dinner. They had just shown me the gun. Now I knew exactly when they planned to pull the trigger. My phone buzzed against my thigh. A silent alarm in the midst of the dinner conversation. I kept my hands above the table, smiling politely at a woman discussing her summer home in the Hamptons, while I subtly angled the screen to read Ethan's message. Found a leak. Vendor named Cranford Strategy Group. They have received $180,000 in the last 5 months. Invoices are vague. Consulting fees, market research. I felt a spike of adrenaline. I typed back a single question with one hand. Who owns it? Ethan's reply was almost instantaneous. Registered agent is a Travis Cole. Address is a residential rental in Trenton. Cole. The same last name as the woman currently sitting to my husband's right, pretending to be a high society consultant. They were not just stealing my money. They were funneling it directly into her family's pockets through a shell company. It was clumsy, arrogant, and beautifully traceable. Another text came through, this time from Naomi. She had been analyzing the power of attorney angle. Claire, listen to me. A power of attorney grants authority, but it creates a fiduciary duty. If he uses that power to transfer assets to himself or a romantic partner, that is self-dealing. It is not just a civil lawsuit anymore. It is a criminal breach. The memory hit me then, sharp and nauseating. 3 months ago, I had been bedridden with a severe flu. I remembered Grant coming into the bedroom with a glass of water and a stack of papers, just tax forms and insurance updates. "Honey," he had said, smoothing my hair. "I know you are tired, but I need these signed so we do not get fined." I had signed them. I had signed my life away because I was too feverish to read the fine print. I had handed him the weapon he was now holding to my head. Miles leaned over to me, interrupting my thoughts. He looked nervous, checking his watch. "Claire," he murmured, "just so you are prepared. The itinerary has a highlight. Immediately after dessert is served, we are going to announce the lead sponsor. We have a videographer set up to record the signing of the commitment. It is Grand Theater." The trap snapped into focus. They did not just want my signature, they wanted it recorded. They wanted a video of me smiling, holding the pen, and signing the document in front of witnesses. If I tried to claim fraud later, they would play that video in court. "Look, Your Honor." She was happy. She was willing. She simply changed her mind later. It was diabolical. "I understand," I said, keeping my face impassive. "Excuse me for a moment, Miles. I need to powder my nose before the show." I walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. As I passed the coat check, I heard a hushed, urgent voice. I stopped behind a decorative pillar. It was Whitney. She was speaking to a man I did not recognize, a man holding a thick envelope. "The trust transfer is ready," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "As soon as the donation is signed, the beneficiary update goes through. Tonight." Beneficiary. The word echoed in my mind. I slipped into the bathroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. I opened the email chain Miles had sent me earlier. I dug deeper into the attachments, past the signature samples, until I found a file I had missed. Policy Beneficiary Update, PDF. I opened it. It was a change of beneficiary form for my primary life insurance policy and the Hartley Family Trust. I scanned the numbers. The total value of the assets being reassigned was $8 million, and there, in the field marked Primary Beneficiary, was the name Grant Whitmore. I zoomed in on the signature line at the bottom. It was my name, but it was wrong. The ink density was too uniform. It was a digital collage, a high-resolution copy-paste job taken from the samples they had practiced. They were not just planning to divorce me. They were setting up a golden parachute worth $8 million, funded by my death or my financial ruin. I lowered the phone. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer the confused wife who had walked in from the cold. She was the CEO who had just discovered embezzlement in her own boardroom. "Okay," I whispered to my reflection. "You want a show, I will give you a show." I returned to the dining room, smoothing the silk of my dress with deliberate slowness. I softened my expression, letting my shoulders slump just enough to suggest defeat. I looked at my husband, making sure my eyes held a shimmer of unshed tears. "Grant," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let us talk privately after the meal. I do not want to make a noise here." The tension in Grant's frame evaporated instantly. He exhaled a long breath, a sound of pure relief. He smiled, that charming, boyish smile that had fooled me for a decade. He reached out and squeezed my hand, interpreting my submission as a victory. "Thank you, honey," Grant said, his voice regaining its confidence. "I knew you would understand." Across the table, Whitney took a sip of her wine. She looked at me over the rim of the glass, her eyes gleaming with premature triumph. She believed the obstacle had been removed. She thought I was folding. I turned slightly toward Miles Redding. I kept my face neutral, but my voice was steel when I spoke to him under the cover of the ambient chatter. "Mr. Redding, please continue the program exactly as planned," I murmured. "I want to see exactly what they intend to do, but I need you to ensure your security team is standing by." Miles nodded imperceptibly. He tapped his phone beneath the table. I knew what he was doing. He was alerting his private security detail to station themselves near the study. And more importantly, he was activating the smart home's internal recording system. Every word spoken in this house from this moment on would be preserved. Before the dessert course arrived, Dolores stood up and signaled for me to follow her. She practically dragged me into the expansive kitchen, away from the guests. The staff bustled around us, but Dolores ignored them. She backed me against a granite island, her face contorted with a mix of desperation and malice. "Listen to me, you foolish girl," Dolores hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Sign the papers. If you sign, you remain the prestigious Mrs. Whitmore. You keep the name. You keep the status. If you do not sign, you will just be another abandoned woman with nothing." I looked at her. I saw the fear behind her aggression. She needed this money just as much as Grant did. "I am not afraid of being abandoned, Dolores," I said, giving a small, fragile smile. "I am only afraid of signing the wrong mistake." She scoffed, thinking I was just being difficult. But she let me go. 10 minutes later, Grant summoned me to the library. The room was dim, lit only by the desk lamp and the glow of the fireplace. Whitney was there, leaning against the bookshelves, looking like she was already measuring the room for redecoration. Grant stood behind the desk, holding the pen with his initials on it. He held it out to me like a peace offering. "Claire, look," Grant said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Just sign the sponsorship pledge. Once you sign, I will give you back your position as my wife. We can go back to normal. Do not make this hard for me." It was a transaction. My dignity for his validation. He was selling me my own marriage. Whitney couldn't help herself. She stepped forward, her greed getting the better of her discretion. "Just do it, Claire," Whitney said, checking her watch. "We are on a schedule. After the signing, the townhouse in Society Hill will transfer quickly, and we can all move on." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained impassive. There it was, the confirmation. The townhouse in Society Hill was one of my prime investment properties, held in a separate trust. They had the transfer papers ready to go, contingent on this event. I nodded slowly, acting as if I was resigning myself to their terms. "Okay," I whispered. "I understand." I took the pen. In my mind, I was not surrendering. I was lining up the dominoes. I had the forged signature samples in my inbox. I had the paper trail of the vendor payments to Whitney's family. And now, I had their verbal confession recorded on Miles Redding's security server. They thought they were handing me a pen to sign away my fortune. In reality, they had just handed me the gavel to pass sentence. The living room erupted in cheers as the Philadelphia Eagles scored a touchdown, the noise providing the perfect cover for my movements. While Grant was busy pretending to bond with a potential investor over the replay, I slipped over to the side table where he had carelessly left his leather portfolio. I opened it just enough to see the documents inside. My breath hitched. It was not just the sponsorship pledge. Beneath that lay a draft for a temporary stock transfer and an annex for immediate capital disbursement. They were not just asking for a donation, they were positioning themselves to drain the operating capital of North Pine Ventures under the guise of charitable allocation. My phone vibrated. It was Ethan. Red flag on the ledger. Pending automatic transfer scheduled for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Purchase of a warehouse in Camden. Seller is a limited liability company formed 3 weeks ago. I typed back fast. Value. $2 million, Ethan replied. The shell company is linked to Grant's social security number. I stared at the screen, the cold reality washing over me. This was a smash and grab. They knew I would eventually find out about the affair and the embezzlement, so they had planned a final massive extraction. They intended to take $2 million out of the company accounts the moment the banks opened, leaving me with a hollowed-out business and a signed paper trail justifying the expense. I forwarded the details to Naomi. Her response was immediate. Drafting the emergency motion now. We are flagging the transaction as fraudulent. I am notifying the bank's fraud department to freeze the transfer. Miles appeared at my elbow, his face grim. He held his phone out to me, displaying a new email he had intercepted from the internal server traffic. It was from Whitney to Grant. Do not forget to turn on the video when Claire signs. We need proof she did it voluntarily so she cannot claim duress later. I handed the phone back to Miles. They want a performance, I whispered. They want to record their own crime so they can call it a contract. A raised voice from the kitchen area caught my attention. It was not the festive sound of party preparation. It was the sharp, jagged sound of conflict. I signaled Miles to wait and moved silently toward the swinging service door. I pressed my ear against the wood. Dolores was shouting, though she was trying to keep her voice down. The townhouse in Society Hill was supposed to be mine. Dolores hissed. That was the deal. Grant, I need that property for my retirement. You promised me security. Whitney's voice cut through the air, arrogant and dismissive. You have nothing but the name Whitmore. Dolores. Whitney spat back. I am the one who forged the documents. I am the one who set up the shell company. I did the paperwork while you just drank wine. Stop it. Both of you. Grant's voice was frantic, cracking under the pressure. Keep your voices down. We are 10 feet away from her. Then tell her, Dolores demanded. Tell this little gold digger that the house is mine. Focus, Grant snapped. We just need Claire to sign the pledge. Once she signs, the authority is validated. The money hits the account at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and then we leave. We are gone. You can fight over the real estate later. I stepped back from the door, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. We leave. They were not planning to stay and fight for the marriage. They were not planning to face the fallout. They were going to take $2 million and vanish into the sunset, leaving me to explain the wreckage to the IRS and my board of directors. I looked back at the dining room, where the guests were beginning to gather for the big announcement. The stage was set. Grant wanted his signature. Whitney wanted her video. Dolores wanted her house. I smoothed my dress and walked toward the light. I knew exactly how this party had to end. It could not wait until tomorrow. The execution had to happen right now, on the very stage they had built to destroy me. Miles Redding stepped to the center of the room, clapping his hands to gather the attention of the crowd. The chatter died down, replaced by the expectant silence of a wealthy audience waiting for a spectacle. Ladies and gentlemen, before we serve the dessert, Miles announced, gesturing to the cameraman who had positioned himself near the fireplace. We would like to record a special message of gratitude to our honorary sponsor. Grant moved instantly. He wrapped his arm around my waist, his grip tight enough to bruise, and pulled me into the frame. He pressed the heavy black lacquer pen into my hand, his breath hot against my ear. Smile, he whispered, his voice a jagged edge of desperation. Sign it, or we are done. I looked down at the document. Then I looked up, straight into the lens of the camera. The red recording light blinked like a steady, unblinking eye. I did not smile. I did not look at my husband. I addressed the room with the calm, measured tone of a judge reading a verdict. "I always believe in transparency," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, "especially when money and family are involved. So, before I sign, I want to read aloud exactly what I am committing to." Grant's body went rigid against mine. "No need for that." "Claire, he started, trying to reach for the paper. "Please." I interrupted him, stepping slightly away so his arm fell from my waist. "It is important." I held the document up to the light. The room was deathly quiet. Section 4, paragraph 2. I read, "Transfer of interest. The undersigned hereby irrevocably assigns beneficiary rights of the Hartley Family Trust and the associated life insurance policy number 492 to Grant Whitmore." I lowered the paper and turned to Miles. "Mr. Redding," I asked, "do you confirm this is the document you received from my husband?" Miles stepped forward, his face grave. "Yes," Miles said. "And I must state for the record that I sent a copy to my legal counsel immediately upon receipt because I found the terms irregular." I turned back to the camera, then to the guests. "The signature on this document is not mine," I declared. "And that is not all. I have just received a forensic accounting report. A vendor approved by my husband, a company called Cranford Strategy Group, has been siphoning corporate funds. Those funds are being routed to a shell company registered to the family of Ms. Whitney Cole." Whitney gasped. She stepped forward, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "That is a lie," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is just jealous. She is making it up because she knows she lost him, but the damage was already done." The seed of panic I had planted in the kitchen had sprouted. Dolores, hearing the mention of money and Whitney's name in the same sentence, suddenly connected the dots. Her eyes widened in horror. "Wait," Dolores stammered, stepping out from the crowd. "Whitney, what did you mean earlier when you said, 'the money comes tomorrow morning'? Is that the company money?" Grant turned pale. He tried to step between his mother and his mistress, holding up his hands like a traffic cop in a pileup. "Mother, stop," Grant pleaded. "Not now. Do not tell me to stop." Dolores screamed, losing all composure. "You told me the house in Society Hill was my retirement. Is she taking that money too?" "Did you promise my house to her?" Whitney wheeled on Dolores, her facade of sophistication crumbling. "He promised me the assets," Whitney yelled back. I did the work. I forged the she stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. But the silence that followed was louder than any scream. She had just confessed. Grant looked from Whitney to Dolores, sweat pouring down his face, realizing his perfect plan was unraveling on live video. He looked like a cornered animal, trapped in the glare of the lights, while the entire room watched the beautiful, wealthy Whitmore family tear itself apart over stolen money. I raised my hand, a silent signal to Miles. The heavy oak doors swung open, and 2 uniformed security guards stepped in, flanking a sharp-looking woman in a charcoal suit. It was the forensic financial investigator Naomi had arranged to be on standby. The chaotic shouting of the Whitmores died down instantly, replaced by a suffocating dread. My phone rang. It was Ethan. I answered it on speakerphone, holding it up like a microphone. "The Camden transfer is blocked." Ethan's voice rang out clearly. "The bank flagged the transaction as suspicious activity based on the affidavit. All accounts linked to Grant Whitmore and the Cranford Strategy Group are frozen effective immediately." Grant slumped against the table, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure. His escape route had just been barricaded before he could speak. The large television screen above the fireplace flickered to life. Miles had connected Naomi via video call. She sat in her office, framed by law books, her expression unyielding. "Mr. Whitmore," Naomi said, her voice amplified through the surround sound speakers. "I have just filed an emergency injunction with the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas. We are charging you with forgery, abuse of fiduciary duty via power of attorney, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The police are en route to collect statements." Grant looked around the room, his eyes wild and desperate. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his hands shaking. "We were just planning financial restructuring." I walked over to the smart home console on the wall. "Restructuring?" I asked. "Let us hear the restructuring plan." I pressed play on the audio file Miles had isolated from the kitchen feed. Grant's voice filled the room, crisp and undeniable. "Just need Claire to sign. Once she signs, the money hits the account at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and then we leave. We are gone." The silence that followed was absolute. The guests looked at Grant with pure disgust. The facade was not just cracked, it was pulverized. Grant turned to me, his arrogance gone, replaced by a pathetic, weeping desperation. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "Claire, please." "You misunderstand," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "I was just scared you would leave me. I needed a safety net. I just wanted freedom. I need freedom." I looked down at him, feeling nothing but a cold, distant pity. "Freedom is not stealing someone else's life." "Grant," I said quietly. Whitney tried to make a run for the side door, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. Security blocked her path without effort. Realizing she was trapped, she turned on Grant instantly. "It was his idea," Whitney screamed, pointing a trembling finger at him. "He made me do it. He set up the shell company. I just practiced the signatures because he told me to. I have the emails. I will show you everything." Dolores collapsed onto a chair, weeping into her hands. She reached out to grab the hem of my dress. "Claire, my daughter," she wailed. "I did not know. I swear I did not know it was criminal." I gently pulled my dress from her grip. "You knew enough to ask for your share." "Dolores," I said. The investigator stepped forward, holding up an evidence bag. "I am seizing all electronic devices and documents in this room as potential evidence," she announced. "Nobody leaves until the police arrive." Grant looked at the party guests, then at the police lights now flashing through the front windows. He realized his social standing, his career, and his freedom were gone. The dinner party had become a crime scene. I picked up the black lacquer pen from the table. I walked over to Grant and pressed it into his chest. "You wanted me to sign so I would lose everything," I said. "I am not signing that. The only thing I am signing is the divorce papers." I turned and walked out of the room. I did not look back at the chaos, the crying, or the flashing lights. I pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped out into the crisp, late autumn air. The wind was cold, but it felt clean. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a confirmation from the bank assets secured. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots. Behind me, the heavy doors of the villa slammed shut, sealing away the lies and the people who told them. For the first time in years, the path ahead was clear, and I was walking it under my own name. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from today. I would love to hear your thoughts on how Claire handled this betrayal. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.